Yeah.
I want to talk I want to talk about Netflix content diversification play. The big one that really came out and I wanted to talk to Yuri about was the Matt Damon and Ben Affleck interview where they're just kind of like vibing off each other and interviewing each other. And I thought it was a really smart play because I think movie studios, after the whole Marty Supreme, Timothy Chalamet thing, are realizing that the real star power is all the celebrities, is all the stars. And they really need to start, putting the emphasis on them and getting them to like be natural and like, come out and do stuff. Obviously, we've seen a lot of the younger stars doing this. We have the little puppy videos for like, BuzzFeed. But I feel like a lot of the older stars haven't really done any of that because they haven't had to, right? Like they kind of just go based off their star power. Um, and it wasn't until Tom Cruise started kind of participating a lot more in like TikToks and being really heavily focused on his own PR that I think the older stars started to kind of get that. And then we saw Leonardo DiCaprio show up for a couple podcasts, including the New Heights podcast with Travis and Jason Kelsey for One Battle After Another. So we're starting to see like these big major stars finally come to new channels where the younger audiences are, the younger audiences that they want to get to come to their movies. So they sit down for this interview where they're talking about just being weird Boston kids who've been friends for 40 years. They're barely even talking about the movie. They're more just talking about having fun recording the movie together, how they grew up together. One of the stories that stuck out to me was when Ben Affleck said that in the early days, they lived together and they shared a bank account. And whenever one of them was getting paid and the other one wasn't, the other one would cover the other, person. And so I thought that was just like a nice way of like kind of learning more about them and their friendship, which, kind of captures everybody's attention because they've been friends for so long. Did you see this interview, Yuri?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was hilarious, really. But it's interesting to see that we're now getting back to like the original premise of Hollywood, like the way it worked maybe like 30 years ago when, well, stars were actually the
Hmm.
stars. And it's later that everybody figured out, okay, you can actually create, like a cinema universe there and like Marvel came out. But since their recent attempt basically failed, we're now seeing, okay, actually like stars still make sense. And it's sort of like both like actors and directors. It's like, okay, it's like Cameron's Avatar, it's like Villeneuve's Dune, and sort of like Timothée Chalamet is trying to become like sort of like
Hmm.
that power in this industry. And it's interesting to see what's going to come out of it.
Yeah, definitely. And then one other thing that they also announced was Ben Affleck and Matt Damon using their star power to get something out of Netflix, which no other stars or producers or directors have gotten before, which makes you wonder about those directors that have worked with them that are also very high profile. And that's basically Affleck and Damon's Artist Equity, launched in 2022, pushes profit sharing as core philosophy. So that means that that Netflix has greenlit performance-based bonuses for all 1,200 members of the crew, which is the first time for Netflix. And it's one of those things that they rolled out the interview and then they rolled out these stories, and all the stories are, Netflix, signed special deal with Ben Affleck and Matt Damon. And I thought it was another way of them also trying to get attention that wasn't at all about the movie itself, but more about like the production and pretty much everything that's been happening recently, right? Like Netflix is in the process of trying to buy Warner Brothers, right? And that's like a huge thing that's on a lot of people's minds because they're like, are they going to ruin the theatrical window? Are they going to stop, even using movie theaters? Is everything just going to become streaming? And Netflix is trying to assuage people and tell them, no, we're going to still do 17 days. And you've seen a lot of artists and directors, really high profile ones like Christopher Nolan say, well, I'm never going to work with Netflix because I want my movies to go to the movie theaters. And here you have Ben Affleck and Matt Damon. They're not going to have the movie in the theaters, but they've come up with a different thing that they think will change the dynamics of Hollywood, which is giving profit sharing to the crew, like the residuals that we hear of, right? Did you also hear about this one, Yuri?
Yeah, and I think it creates like a very unique precedent. So I'm not even like sure how Netflix was ready to approach this, right? Because
Hmm.
what this means is that potentially any future movie could demand the same from them because the precedent is already set.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a thing. Also, another thing that people are bringing up is that this is probably going to be the first time that Netflix has to show its real numbers for like the bonuses. When we start hearing that the crew got X amount of money, which is going to make its way out, because why wouldn't they share that? So then other crew members can also start getting that themselves in the future, right? Netflix right now is obviously very opaque. It's a black box, right? They don't have to share numbers. They really only share numbers when it's something that's really big, right? I mean, we heard about K-pop Demon Hunters, like those numbers because it was exceptional, right? Like, um, we've heard numbers for that. We've heard numbers for like Stranger Things, the really good ones. But then we don't hear about the shows that don't do that well, right? We kind of just, oh, they quietly, get kind of shunted off or they get canceled, right? So I wonder if this is a way for people to start kind of like pushing back and like the artists themselves being like, no, we want this as well. We want to see the numbers. Maybe it wouldn't be quite as much of a profit share, but like you said, the precedent is now there.
Yeah, and the precedent for data as well, because Hollywood is unusually transparent. Like you can
Mhm,
go online and you can learn how much Avatar has earned, like since since they started rolling it out.
mhm,
It's crazy. Like no other industry is like this. You don't have this data from like music or anything else, and it's
mhm.
probably the result of like this weird combination of like studios, like labor unions, and all the others who want to share sort of like this big pie. I think another item here is that if the movie actually fails, which a lot of these like high profile movies with great actors on Netflix actually did,
Mhm.
they would also probably not get much. But I think what matters is actually have the skin in the game, because for any kind of like good announcement and any kind of like potentially positive story, you need to put something out there. It's almost like a ritual sacrifice, right? You need to be able to fail because otherwise that just doesn't count.
Yeah. The other thing I will say though is there's a lot of like really shitty movies that like are horrible, get rated horribly. But then Netflix is like, "Actually, that was, like, one of our highest performing, movies ever on the platform," right? Like, I'm thinking here of Red Notice, right? The
Oh,
movie with, The Rock and Gadot, and then Ryan Reynolds also had that other movie, Adam's Project, I think. These, by all, accounts, were, like, horrible movies by, like, the critics and people that actually watched them, but then the numbers that Netflix put out show that people watch them. It might be a little bit easier for these numbers to get hit than anything else. And I think, it's a huge reason why I think Ben and Matt agreed to do this interview, which, they usually don't do, so that they can get more promotion and get, more people to like watch the movie. So I think it's also another thing here about content marketing. Like, what are you doing to promote your product or service? What are these new ways that you're thinking about, putting it in front of people? I think a lot of us, just think about how we're marketing to the customer should just be, this is what the product does. These are the features. These are, what you can look forward to, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of the times people just want to know the story behind, what the product is, why you're doing it, why it matters to you, so that they kind of relate to you more as a human. So that's oftentimes what I tell founders: come at it from a place of like, this is why this matters to me. This is why I'm working on this. And then talk about like the product features. Cause I mean, there's so many products these days that are literally just the same. They just have different brand, awareness and brand equity. And when you look at the difference between that, a lot of it is just people are more aware of the brand, people are more aware of the CEO. We'll talk about that later here, as another example of like CEOs starting to put themselves out there a little bit more, not just with product features, but personal stories. Um, and then also what Yuri mentioned, that if it underperforms, this performance-based bonus story is something that's gonna, go around Hollywood as something that like was tried and failed. And I wonder if it'll get tried again. But another thing to bring up here was the special deal that Ryan Coogler had for Sinners with WB, right? Like we saw kind of like the backlash for that from like Warner Brothers executives and other movie studio executives who kind of started putting out in trade magazines, primarily here Variety, who was calling out Sinners for not making enough money that first like debut weekend, in order to kind of nip it in the bud, for other directors to come start asking for that deal that Ryan Coogler
yeah.
got. And then another announcement that Netflix made is it's going really heavy into video podcasts. So I saw a couple announcements from The Ringer and iHeartMedia and Barstool Sports, who have all signed exclusive deals with Netflix to start. putting their video podcasts on the platform. And it's funny because I kind of, get this a lot from like people like, why would people watch, podcasts on Netflix? And I'm like, well, they're watching them on YouTube. Like that's one of the main drivers of YouTube's growth is all these like podcasts that have like come onto the platform, and all the creators that are putting a lot of time and money and effort to build up their audiences in order to start getting those like bigger payouts. And then you also think about the type of content that's on Netflix, right? There's a lot of reality TV shows. There's a lot of like lowbrow dramas and soap operas, basically. Video podcast is kind of the same thing, except you kind of know the personalities a little bit more and you can just kind of have it on in the background. So did you also hear about this, Yuri?
Yes, and I think what Netflix is trying to do here is basically normalize just like having your TV with the Netflix on, like how
Hmm.
our parents would just be watching TV like for their
Hmm.
entire day if on a weekend or something like this. Like I don't know about you, but like for me, Netflix is still sort of like more, slightly more focused experience. I decide, okay, I want to watch something, I go to my couch.
Hmm.
But I think what they're trying to do is again like normalize and put it out there. Look, you can just leave it on for the day. It's like yet another like 4-hour video podcast with some dudes talking.
Hmm.
And it's also interesting that it definitely seems like the end state of podcasts is still unclear, right? First, Spotify
Hmm.
bought everyone, then they released everyone. Like you can now go and like listen to like Joe Rogan on like YouTube or like other
Hmm.
platforms. But like nobody is really capable to figure out what to do with podcasts, basically. But I think what's really smart about this is like Netflix has been saying for a long time that their actual competitor isn't like HBO or Disney. It's just
Hmm.
YouTube and TikTok. And they will never have user-generated content on their platform. But a lot of these like podcasts, they're not really user-generated. They are like
Hmm.
high-end production run by like, like a dozen people. So there's not really any harm in putting them on Netflix and just like having them along with maybe like stand-up specials, reality TV shows, and,
Right.
just yet another movie.
Yeah, definitely. What you said about kind of having the TV going on in the background reminds me of another thing, right? Where it's like, I see this a lot. We're just in Texas with my in-laws, and they kind of just have the TV, like the news going like the whole day, you know? And
Turtle.
I'm like, we don't do that. Like but I wonder if like a new way to kind of just have where young people are getting their news is podcasts, right? You just kind of have the podcast going on in the background and you're listening to it the way that you do the news. So I think there is something here. They did mention that they are also wanting people to watch it on mobile, right? So it's like, well, what sort of content could we give them on mobile that they'll like, watch? And podcasts kind of are filling in this gap. So we'll see where it's going. But yeah, I'm curious to see how it kind of like plays out in the long run.
For sure, for sure.
Cool. So a couple lessons here is content. Basically, Netflix is the one like putting this content out, right? It wasn't out there on like E News. It wasn't on like Variety. It wasn't like any of these other like entertainment trade magazines. Netflix is starting to create their own content, which also makes me wonder if they're just going to start creating their own podcasts in house where they start interviewing like the celebrities that are on their shows, right? Like what better way to promote all their shows than to get the celebrities to do it themselves? They also have the possibility to do, what Variety does every year with the actors on actors or the directors on directors. Like that would be super interesting content for them to start trying to create. And then think about if they use that to then create, to connect the podcast host with celebrities. And then it becomes like this whole like exclusive thing that they have within their platform of using like the celebrities to grow their reach, and going from there. Another thing to hear is kind of going back to that values driven brand positioning where, there's a lot of talk right now about how Hollywood is kind of, not necessarily failing, but the dynamics are changing from how it used to be, right? Artists, writers, are all getting paid less. I mean, here in LA, we hear all the time that films and shows don't even film here anymore because it's so expensive. It's just easier to go film in Toronto or Atlanta, right? And these are all things that like everybody here in the industry is thinking about. So here's two mega stars using their star power to try to fix something in the industry. And I think it's a welcome thing. I think, for me anyway, to see Netflix finally capitulating and being like, "You're right. This isn't sustainable if all the people that are like the good writers and creators." all of a sudden can't afford to be in LA or can't afford to stay in the industry because they're not, getting paid enough, Um, so, good on them for using that. And then the last thing is talent leverage as a structural disruptor. So this is like, props to Matt Damon and Ben Affleck for using their star power to do this, because otherwise it probably wouldn't be happening. And it reminds me of when we celebrated Robert Redford for starting the Sundance Festival. That was like mainly to promote indie films, which had never really been promoted before in that way. So this is something that like, people that have power have to start thinking about. It's like, what can you do to keep the industry going, right?